千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together.
Let's get back into Dao De Jing, chapter 28. This is a chapter we were all looking at. And of course, the first thing that we did was to do a sectional analysis. And we were able to divide it up into 4 sections, as you can see here. And as also you can see, there are many repeating characters. So what we did previously was that we pointed out the repeating characters from one section to the next, successively is what I'm trying to say. And we found many similarities, and we also found the characters that varied from one section to the next, the differences. Then what I did was that I pointed out by circling enclosing the characters that varied from section to section, and then talked about the commonality between them. Even though they're different characters, they all ended up talking about the overall principle of the Tao, and section 1, 2, and 3 had a lot to do with the yin and yang symbol, as you may recall, and we're about to talk about that again. Previously, we got to the second section. Now, we did touch upon the third section as well. Sometimes it's easier to see the meaning of the original by taking into account the different ways that Lao Tzu utilized to express the same idea. In this case, he expressed a similar idea in 3 different ways in the 3 sections, each section taken up 5 lines. So previously, we discussed knowing the masculine while holding on to the feminine, and the way that I explained it was to know the yang principle of the yin and yang symbol while holding on to the yin symbol, which is the feminine principle. And also the notation from last time was to keep in mind that it's not talking about male, female, gender-wise. Rather, it's talking about the masculine and feminine energies that exist in every person, regardless of biological gender. Then we got to this intriguing line, know the white, hold to the black. So we're going to explore that at great length today. So prior to getting to know the white, hold to the black, we'll do a brief recap of the first section. And I think, as you are used to by now, whenever we do a recap of the previously explored lines, what we do is that we bring the entire content up all at once, and we don't have the slide build up point by point. So, as a reminder, to know the masculine, hold the feminine, means to know the yang principle, which is all about taking action, taking initiative, pushing ahead, being proactive, being decisive, action-oriented, etc. There's going to be times when that is the most appropriate thing to do. It is not true to say that when you cultivate the Tao, you just let things be and you go with the flow. Not true. Sometimes you do. Other times, it calls for action, and what Tao cultivators do is that they study the situation, they observe the situation, so they know how to take skillful action. Taking skillful action means to take minimal action, unattached action, action that achieves the purpose and does not overdo it. So that's the meaning of taking initiative, being action-oriented, etc. At the same time, you must proceed with both the yin and yang energies, which means holding on to the yin, and that's, in this particular case, the yielding, the flexibility, waiting sometimes, observing, waiting for the right time, the right opportunity, observing, thinking, considering, weighing your options. There's going to be a lot of times when that is the most appropriate thing to do. And when you have applied consideration and thoughtfulness to a situation, you know your chances of taking a correct course of action will increase. So that is the reason why we need to keep both the masculine and the feminine. Know the masculine, hold to the feminine, proceed that way. It's advantageous. So that's a quick recap of what we talked about last time. If you are able to be that way, Lao Tzu has an interesting metaphor for us to ponder. He says that if you can have mastery of both yin and yang, then you become like the watercourse. The watercourse is that river in the center of the valley that receives from all the streams that flow into it from the surrounding mountains of the valley. So it's the gathering place, it's the concentration point, it's the focal point or the nexus of the various streams in the valley. So this is a metaphor for what happens in life when you have set yourself up to be the receiving end of positive energy from other people. So looking at that, you can tell immediately that Tao cultivation is not and should not be a solitary activity. You always need interaction with people, and what Lao Tzu would emphasize is that you need positive interactions with people. That is, you help and support them, while also receive help and support from them. If you do that, it will lead you to the Tao, because we can all learn a great deal from one another. As we help one another, we also learn. So this is causing the meaning of this chapter to begin to take shape. When we get to section 2 and 3, we're going to see different ways of attacking the same point, different ways of explaining and expressing the same point over and over again. And we come away, when we're done with the 3 sections, we will come away with a much more complete understanding. Okay, so what happens when you become the watercourse of the world? That is, you attract positive energy to you, good people to you, just like the watercourse receives from so many different streams. Okay, the next line says, the eternal virtue does not depart. So that is, as you continue to cultivate the Tao, you know, among people, learning from people, helping people, this all has a positive impact on your cultivation. So your virtues become ever more refined, your spirituality becomes ever more elevated. So at one point, you're going to get to a place where the virtues that you had to remind yourself to practice, you no longer need that same reminder, because they have become completely natural to you. So you do the virtuous thing, you think in virtuous ways without prompting, without reminders. By definition, you are a virtuous person. You don't need to try to be virtuous, you already are. So by being always virtuous and naturally virtuous, it means that your virtues have become a part of you, so you don't have to worry about the virtues ever leaving you, ever departing ever losing the virtues. So that's why Lao Tzu calls such virtues eternal virtues. They're constant. So that is the process of attaining the Tao. By first practicing the virtues, then being virtuous naturally, no longer have to remind yourself, and that gets you as close as you can get to attaining the level of the Tao. So this is also from last time, and let's also talk about the conclusion in section 1, to return to the state of the infant. So this does not mean that you become childish, that you become like a toddler, that you become helpless like an infant. Rather, here the infant refers to your original essence, your true self, the most primal and pure version of you. So this, all your life, you've been building up from this point. You started out as a blank slate, and you've been adding to it as the years go on. This doesn't mean that your original essence no longer exists. It's still there. It's just under many layers of conditioning and additional concepts and ideas from the material world. So to return to that original state, which is still there, buried beneath all the layers, it just means that you have to unlearn, let go, hang on to what is useful and of value to you. Let go of the things that might have been helpful once upon a time, but are no longer necessary. The more you do that, the more you simplify, pick and choose, and stick to the essence, the more you are able to get back to your original essence, your true self. Now, of course, nothing is ever the same. In the practice of the Tao, we say that a man can never step into the same river twice, for the river has changed. It's been flowing all this time, and the person stepping into it has also changed. So you can return to the original essence, your true self, but what you return to, although pure and primal, it'll actually be a better version of your true self. It'll be the true self plus the wisdom that you have curated throughout your life. So the second bullet there, to return to the states, is to reconnect with the inner child, the core of your being that still retains your original playfulness, your sense of wonder and joy. So all of those things are still there, but now they can be supplemented by the wisdom that you have earned along the way. So in one way of speaking, you can think of it as enlightenment. Now, the term enlightenment in Buddhism is highly specific. It means an awakening process to become Buddha, to attain Buddhahood. So in one sense, when we say returning to the child is attaining enlightenment, you're going to want to, I would advise that you become familiar with the Buddhist definition of enlightenment as well, so you can see the difference, the subtle differences, the nuance between returning to the state of the infant and attaining enlightenment and becoming Buddha. They both have to do with a kind of spiritual renewal, spiritual awakening. The style of expression is a little bit different. So I would encourage everyone to look into that more deeply. And as a matter of fact, today we're actually going to talk a little bit more about some of those Buddhist concepts and how they play really well with the concepts being expressed in this particular chapter of the Tao Te Ching. So looking at this whole concept of returning to the state of the infant, last time I also pointed out that there are 3 different expressions of the same idea. Return to the state of the infant, return to the state of the boundless, return to the state of plain wood. So they're talking about the same thing, but in different ways, different angles, so to speak. So as an example, we talked about returning to the infant as going back to your original, pure primal state, and that matches Mooji in the 2nd section, that's line 10, and Pu in the 3rd section. So Pu is simplicity, it's plainness. Overall, all 3 are referring to a spiritual renewal, a manifestation or reinvention of yourself. So that's important, this idea of renewal and reinvention. So what I said last time that bears repeating is that even though human beings are compared to a plain piece of wood, human beings are fortunately not a plain piece of wood. So a plain piece of wood, once you work on it and it becomes a tool, it's set. Perhaps you carve a wooden bowl out of it, and after that you can use it as a bowl. But then you can't do anything else with it. You can't turn that into a figurine of the Buddha, for instance, because the work has already been done. With human beings, we enjoy greater flexibility than a piece of wood. So you always have the ability to revert back to the state of plain wood and reinvent yourself by carving it into something else that is going to be useful to you in the next leg of your journey. So that's the idea. So what we talked about last time was that what happens when you have renewed or reinvented yourself? Well, when you get there, what happens is anything you want, because when you study the Tao, you become aware of how to design your own destiny, how to be the author of the story of your life. So what you want to become next, that's up to you. New possibilities open up. You can make new choices with insights from your previous experience. In the 2nd section, we're actually going to talk about that. We're going to be talking about knowing the white, but hold on to the black. That is, knowing how to proceed along the lines of success, to capitalize on the things that work, while at the same time hold to the black. That is, learning from setbacks from the past, the lessons learned that you accumulated from before. If you do both of those things, you will be able to do essentially what you see here, making new choices with insights from previous experience. So you will once again be going through the process of carving and shaping plain wood, Pu, into something specific. But now you architect, design, lead the process, and you are assisted by the wisdom of the sages. So now, that's what we talked about last time. I want to challenge everyone by going back to this idea of holding on to the yang, holding on to the yin, the yin principle, while knowing the yang, or the way it says it is the other way around. Knowing the yang, or the male, the masculine, while holding on to the yin, or the female, the feminine. So how does that make you the watercourse exactly? So here's the question that I want to pose to everyone. This is sort of a test of everyone's understanding. Hopefully you got something out of the last talk that we had, and you're able to apply some examples. You're able to think about how this can work for you. After this talk is over, you're gonna have to live your life. And when you live your life, I want you to be able to know the yang, hold to the yin, because it is incredibly beneficial. Once you figure out how to do it for yourself, it's incredibly beneficial. So let's have everyone think about this for a moment. How, this is all vague and abstract, and I want something more concrete and applicable that we can use right away in everyday life. So I want to probe deeper and ask the question. Know the yang, hold to the yin. What do you mean exactly? How does this make you the Watercourse? And does everybody remember what the course stands for? What that means? What that symbology is? Okay. So we can start at that point to know what the Watercourse actually is as a reminder. So to remind everyone, the Watercourse is the river in the center of the valley that receives from all the streams flowing from the surrounding mountains. Okay, so you remember, I'm sure, that this metaphor means that you want to become the Watercourse in the sense of being the recipient or the receiving end of positive energies, attracting good people to you, having inspiring, friendship, personal connection, loyalty, etc. So let's put that in there as well, furthering our understanding of the Watercourse. It's to receive positive energies from everyone around you. Okay, I'm getting some pretty good answers. Yep, bring both energies together in a balanced way. That's excellent. So let me stick to the point in the slide for just a moment. I want to make sure everyone understands what it means to be the Watercourse. Kiro, you're definitely on the right track. You've got the right idea, keeping your shortcomings in mind as you deal with others more equitably, thus helping others be positive. That's an excellent interpretation. Now let's come back to the Watercourse for just a moment. I want to be very specific on what it means to receive positive energies from everyone around you. So in real life, let's spell it out. This can manifest as 1, attracting positive attention and building a favorable reputation. So let me be very clear that a Tao cultivator would never set out to attract attention or build a good reputation as a goal by itself. This is always a side effect, a natural side effect of living right. When you live right in accordance with the Tao, you naturally attract positive attention and you naturally build favorable positive reputation. Can't even avoid it. The Tao cultivator would not be someone who goes into hiding to cultivate the Tao without being seen by anyone. That's never the case. The Tao cultivator would not try to advertise or run away. They would strike the point of moderation and live life normally, naturally, without trying to draw attention and without trying to avoid attention. Okay, so that's one manifestation. Let's take a look at another one. This is important, and this calls back to chapter 27 when we talked about relationships and connections. When you are the Watercourse, you are creating and strengthening relationships. Remember, positive energies are coming to you from all directions, from different people. That means attracting love, friendship. And you do this with your family, and when I say team, that could be interpreted very widely. It could be a team for sports. It could be the team that you have that you form with your coworkers. It could be a team that you form with people in your community. Okay, it's a group of people. So creating and strengthening relationships in terms of loyalty and commitment. Okay, so these are specific ways of knowing the yang, hold to the yin. Suzanne, excellent thought there. Knowing when to act or speak, when to keep your peace. Yep, you need both. You need both the active and the passive. You need both the action and the observation. All right, so how about more examples? So here you see, know the yang principle and also hold to the yin principle. Let's start with know the yang principle. So cultivate power. So yang is about the accumulation of power. And by power, I don't necessarily mean like military power or physical power. I mean spiritual power. And it could also be the power of knowledge, knowledge in learning. It could be the power of creativity, creativity in art, and so on. So a Tao cultivator would be interested in cultivating all of the above. Spiritual power, the power of knowledge, the power of creativity, and more. And there's other manifestations of power as well. In society, we have the power of position, the power of authority. So, and we also have, and let's also be very realistic. We live in the real world. There's also power associated with wealth. So it's all of the above. The Tao includes everything. So power is part of it. And what about action? Indeed. Know the Yang principle, taking action from a position of strength. So the Yang principle is about strength, being strong. And strength, when it comes to spiritual power, would be what we would call true spiritual strength. And that manifests as harmony. One of the ways that it can manifest is harmony. What about certainty and clarity? Well, I mean that as the strength that is possible when you possess the power of knowledge. When you know the facts really well, when you're drawing the correct conclusions from the facts, you have a great deal of clarity and certainty about that knowledge. You're ready to turn that knowledge into wisdom. And what about power and creativity? Well, when you're able to tap into the Tao as a universal source of creativity, you quickly find that you are tapping into this endless flow of creativity. It makes you very powerful. So for those of you who are wondering, how can Derek be doing all these talks week after week? Where does all this stuff come from? Oh, well, I'm tapping into the Tao. I'm trying to do exactly what I talk about. I'm trying to practice what I preach. So the result, as you can see, is that every Sunday, I don't run out of things to say. There's always more, and I can always express it in a different way, a way that I hope is helpful to everyone. And I want you to do the same thing. I want you to tap into the same fountain of creativity. It's an endless source, as I said. Okay, so that's one part of it. And you can see that I have highlighted and those keywords in red. Those are the keywords for the Yang principle. And then for Yin, I use blue for that. So how about some examples for that? Let's see. So imagine that you are in some sort of competition. This could be a sporting event, but it could also be social competition. It could be a competition at work. Whenever we compare yourself, whenever you compare yourself with other people, there's a kind of competition that takes form. So if you cultivate the Tao, if you improve yourself, then you know your chances of coming out ahead in those competitive arenas is pretty good. Following the Tao leads to natural excellence. Natural excellence leads to natural victories. You may not be setting out to win, but the triumph is going to be yours regardless. So when that happens as a natural result, the yin principle that you hold on to dictates that you remain humble in victory, and that you give other people a graceful way out. This is important. This is the part where we talk about knowing the yang, hold on to the yin. Yes, you can exert your power, your strength in whatever manifestation that it takes, but you want to remember to let other people be able to bow out gracefully, to let them exit, save face. So what about in interactions, like social interactions, when you deal with other people? Holding to the yin principle means that you always use a soft and gentle touch and be forgiving of transgressions. That's the yin principle. Now, you don't want to be blindly forgiving of everything, but if you examine the situation, your actions, their actions, there's definitely going to be cases where you discover that, well, I could get mad about this wrong that's been done to me, but do I really have to? Maybe I can just let it go. Maybe I don't need to become so attached to it. And that is when you apply the yin principle and say, it's okay. Why don't we just move on? Why don't we just let it go and move on from here? So that will be the yin principle. So throughout Chinese history, there have been many examples of this at all different levels of ancient Chinese society, from the peasants all the way up, to the government officials, to the nobles, to the ruler. So oftentimes, Tao sages will tell stories that come from the highest level, but the idea is that all of us can apply the same example to our own lives at a much lower level. So there is one such story that I want to share with you. And this is ancient Chinese history we're talking about, so this is not a made-up fable, a historical event concerning a historical figure. Chu Zhuang Wang, the three characters that you see on top, Chu Zhuang Wang, and the translation, King Zhuang of Chu. So the first character, Chu, is CHU. That's the name of the kingdom. It's the Chu Guo, the Chu kingdom. Zhuang is the name of the king, and that's the ZHUAN that you see here, Chu Zhuang Wang. This particular figure lived during the what is called the Spring-Autumn period. This is the period of time right before the Warring Stage period. The Warring Stage period is the time of Lao Tzu. So this particular king was before that, was before Lao Tzu. His reign lasted from 613 BC to 591 BC. So if you do a little bit of math, you discover that his reign lasts, more than 20 years. He was the king of the Chu kingdom for more than 20 years. So during that time, he built up the kingdom and became one of the so-called 5 hegemons from the spring-autumn period. It meant that he became one of the 5 dominant rulers of that time. The spring-autumn period of ancient Chinese history, during that time, no clear overall leader emerged out of all the kingdoms that existed. But there were 5 who were dominant, who were the most powerful, and those were known as the 5 hegemons. So he built up his kingdom so that it was powerful enough that he could be dominant. So that's the idea. This is actually the result of applying the Tao to statecraft, to the art of ruling a kingdom. So even though he lived before the time of Lao Tzu, he studied the Tao as well. Remember something that I kept telling everyone, and that is the tradition of the Tao had at least a 2,000-year history before the time of Lao Tzu, and most likely much longer. So the people who came before Lao Tzu, they were all studying the Tao as well. This king was no exception, and he knew how to apply the lessons. And this could account for the success that he had in building up his kingdom to be dominant during that time. So I want to give you a story of Chu Zhuangwang, this particular king, that illustrates his personality so you can gain some insights into how he did what he did and why. Here's the story of Chu Zhuangwang, King Zhuang of Chu. A long time ago, during the spring and autumn period of ancient China, there was a ruler who rose to prominence. His name, Chu Zhuangwang. King Zhuang of the Chu kingdom. Under his rule, Chu became increasingly powerful and dominant. One day, he invited all of his ministers, advisors, and generals to a banquet to celebrate a recent victory. He knew that his kingdom was on the rise. So they all gathered together for the feast. As you see in this painting, there was much drinking of wine and toasting one another in celebration. King Zhuang's concubines were all present as well, these beautiful ladies, serving all the guests, plying them with even more wine, or sing and dance for their entertainment. It was a good time for all, as you can see. One of the ladies present, King Zhuang's consort, Lady Xu, was the focus of attention. All the men present had to admit, at least to themselves, that she was simply stunning. She was so incredibly beautiful. They admired her beauty, but they all understood the rule. She was the king's woman after all, so that meant you could look, but you couldn't touch. And that was the rule. If you violated, it would be on pain of death. That's how things were back then. For her part, the lady treated all of them with gracious courtesy and kept her distance from them, which somehow made her even more attractive, not less, more. Their celebration continued well into the night. So it was, as soon as it started to get dark, King Zhuang ordered the candles be lit. So by candlelight, they continue the festivities. More wine, the king called, more food, more music. Party on, although I'm sure they didn't say party on in ancient China. Then, just as the king was about to propose yet another toast with his guests, a freak gust of wind blew in across the banquet hall. That wind was so strong that it blew out all the candles, so the place plunged into darkness instantly. In the dark, the beautiful Lady Xu felt a man. There was a man that came towards her. This man grabbed her with drunken breath and fumbling hands all over. She struggled free. She managed to grasp the tassel from the man's hat with her hand and pushed him away. Then she felt her way to the king in the dark and told him what just happened. So she was, as you can imagine, not real happy about this. Now she had that tassel in her hand. All the men wore headgear with a tassel on it. So back in those days, in that particular kingdom, it was part of the formal attire. It is the tassel plays the role much like the tie in formal wear today for men. So all the men had a tassel in their headgear, in their hats. So the lady told the king that she could not tell who it was that grabbed her because, well, there was no light at all. Nonetheless, this was a serious offense, a serious breach of protocol. Remember, you could watch, but you could not touch on pain of death. So she said to the king that this breach had to be dealt with immediately and with the most severe consequence imaginable. So she said to the king, "Your Majesty, order the candles be lit again, and we shall see whose hat is missing its tassel." And that's how we will know who the perpetrator was. Now, the king did not go along with this plan from the lady. Instead, he called out to everyone, still in the dark. He said, "Listen up, everybody. I set up this feast today for every single one of you to enjoy to the utmost. Now, I want all of you to take the tassel out of your hat and drink more wine." So all the guests did as the king ordered. They took out that tassel from their hats, they tossed it down. Then, and only then, did the king order that the candles be lit again. The festivities continued. They could now see everyone. There's a light, but no one had a tassel in his hat. So Lady Xu was not happy about this, to say the least. And later on that night, after it was finally over, she confronted the king. "Why did you do that? I wanted to see who it was that was so rude to me, that violated our rules." King Zhuang said to her, "The purpose of the banquet today is to celebrate and to bring everyone closer together, to bring my ministers, advisors, and generals closer to me. Wine causing people to misbehave is not uncommon. It's not an uncommon aspect of human nature. So if you want to find the man responsible and punish him, wouldn't that ruin the evening for everyone? Wouldn't that defeat the purpose of the celebration?" The lady was still a little unhappy, but at least now she could understand why the king did what he did. So 3 years passed. The kingdom of Chu continued on the rise, and there were many battles with a rival kingdom. 3 years later, after the banquet, in subsequent battles between Chu and a rival kingdom, there was one warrior who distinguished himself. In one military campaign after another, this warrior would always be leading the charge. He fought like a man possessed. He defeated numerous enemies. He contributed greatly to their military success overall. His name was Tang Jiao. So the king summoned this warrior. The king singled him out for recognition, praised his courage and his military prowess, and wanted to reward him. Tang Jiao said he was really honored, but he didn't want the reward. He said everything he did was to repay the king's mercy on him. The king was puzzled by this statement and asked him what he meant. That's when it was finally revealed. Tang Jiao was the transgressor that night, 3 years ago at the banquet. He knew what he did was wrong, punishable by death under the law of the kingdom, which he also knew very well. He blamed himself for losing his mind after drinking so much. So, when he was unexpectedly forgiven by the king, he decided from that point on, he would do everything he could to repay the debt. That is why, in subsequent battles, he treated each battle as if his life was not his own. To him, it already belonged to the king. The end. So I hope everyone can see how the story ties in with this chapter. And just like in the Tao Te Ching, where you know the chapters that talk about the king really refer to the individual, this story that talks about this particular king, I hope that you can see yourself as the ruler of the kingdom that is your life. Just as the king has ministers, advisors, and generals, you also have friends and allies. You have families, you have co-workers, you have acquaintances, you have people you know. You have allies as well. King Zhuang was a ruler with absolute power. In the same way, you're the absolute ruler of your own life. You have absolute control over your mind. That power, that control, the rule that you exert, that's the Yang principle. So let me ask everyone this question. When people have done something wrong, or maybe done something wrong to you, they have done you a wrong, or they have made a mistake, what do? Your response can range widely from blowing up, losing your temper, flying off the handle, hitting the ceiling, etc., to the other end of the extreme, to letting it go. Sometimes the wrong just isn't big enough as a deal to pursue. The other person may already know that it was a mistake that he or she had made. Should you then rub his or her nose in it? What would that accomplish? So perhaps the thing to do is to hold to the yin principle. Use gentleness, the soft touch, the flexibility and the forgiveness, the grace, the mercy. Just as King Zhuang, Chu Zhuang Wang, have forgiven the transgressor, and he had even no idea who that was. Suppose that in at least some of the situations in your life that you can find in yourself, to just forgive and let go and move on, particularly when the other person already know that it's wrong. Well, if you can combine the two, the yang energy with the yin soft touch, what will happen then? Well, you're exercising, utilizing yin and yang in accordance to the Tao. So you become the Watercourse. As the Watercourse, you inspire and bring people to you. You win over these people to your side. You earn their trust. You earn their respect. Maybe you even earn their loyalty, just as the king earned the loyalty of this particular warrior, Tang Jia. You too can earn the love, affection, commitment of the people around you. You can start building on that and attracting it to you. And that, you can see, is already the beginning of a great life. And that's what the Tao is really all about. Okay, we are back in the Tao meeting, and we're going to move on from the story. So remember, everyone, when we use these stories as reminders of the ancient teachings, we're never saying that it should always be a particular way. What we're saying each and every time is that you always want to look at a situation and draw the inspiration from that, so that there's going to be times when you want to apply the Tao in a particular way. There's going to be other times when a different kind of principle will be much more applicable or much more appropriate. This point actually becomes really clear in another story that I'm going to talk about later on. So there's always like different aspects of the story that we draw from, that we extract a wisdom out of. Let's keep moving, everybody. We have quite a bit more of the chapter to cover. So let's head into our second hour. So previously, we had visited this particular slide. So this is about knowing the white, hold to the black. Previously, we talked about the white denoting the high profile, the highly visible, the obvious, the surface level, or the external. The black, its complement, will be the low profile, the subtle approach, the unseen or unnoticed. So black in this case is coming from the perspective of nighttime, when it's not easy to see something because there's no illumination. So in managing the various aspects of life, you need both the visible as well as the subtle. This is one interpretation of it. So I'm about to share with everyone an alternative interpretation, which is equally important. Here we go. So know the white. It's a related interpretation that connects to the high visibility tangentially. In this interpretation, white is about success. It's about when things go smoothly or go well. When things are going well for you, there's success, hence there's high profile and high visibility. So in Mandarin, we would say 顺, which means smooth, as in smooth sailing. When things are going smoothly, when things are going well, that's the context of white. Now, as I pointed out last time, when things go smoothly, it's not that you are without challenges. Indeed, quite the opposite. When things go smoothly, it brings about its own challenges. You can become quite arrogant. You can think that, hey, it was all me. I did it myself. That's right. It was all me who should take credit. That arrogance brings about downfall subsequently. So the challenge of white or sun is that you may assume you are single-handedly responsible for your success, and that lays the foundation for future failure. Okay, so if that is what white can be interpreted as, let's also take a look at black. So the flip side of the above is just as important. Black can mean difficulties, failures, and this is also because of the tangential connected meaning that you are far less visible when you have problems. You don't come to people's attention when you have difficulties or when you're stuck. People don't pay attention to you. You are not noticeable. You fade into obscurity. And we have many examples in life that we can see where this is the case. Even something as highly visible as Hollywood, like the movie, the television, the entertainment industry, we have seen many cases where some of the people, some of the celebrities have that high profile, high visibility, and there are also many that might have had success once upon a time, but fade off into obscurity. So the challenge on this side, on the failure side or difficulties, this will be a different kind of failure. This will be a different this will be a different kind of challenge. It's not a challenge where you become arrogant, quite the opposite. The challenge, arrogance is not going to be an issue because knowing that you are not doing well, that's going to humble anyone. The challenge is going to be things that are more survival oriented, possibly even including putting food on the table, having a roof over your head, survival issues. Now, let's continue on talking about this, I think, very interesting interpretation. So what this particular chapter is saying, what this section is saying, is that you should know the externally visible method and approach while holding on to the internal work and preparation. That's the first interpretation. That's when we talked about the white as the high profile, highly visible, and the black as the unnoticed. In a similar way, now we're doing the second interpretation. It is important to know the implication of success, 顺, when things are going well, white, while holding on to the lessons of failure. In Mandarin, 逆, that means things are going against you. So 顺, things are going smoothly, 逆, things are going against you. That's the failure part. That's the difficulty, the setbacks. That's black. So once again, the yin and yang duality applies in that you must know both. You must possess mastery of both. Know the yang, hold to the yin. Now let's take a look at 7 and 8. And you can see, just like before, that these two lines are the same. Exactly the same characters. And just like before, these two lines have slightly different meaning. So the first time we use this, which is line 7, it's basically saying, By being able to wield yin and yang together skillfully, you become the example or standard for others to follow. So regardless of interpretation of white and black, whether it's visible or unnoticed, or success, failure, whether it's one or the other, by being able to wield both sides of the yin and yang symbol, you become an example for others to emulate. The reason being, this is a powerful teaching in the Tao. And you can kind of see that in the story that you just heard about the king. The success that he had, the Tao that he followed in one particular case. So what about line 8? Line 8 is the same characters, same 4 characters being repeated. So line 8, slightly different meaning. It's basically saying, well, if you can set the example then, and then it's setting up the next 2 lines to express a similar conclusion as the previous section. So let's talk about that. Line 9, the eternal virtue does not deviate. So in the same way, this line right here has 2 related interpretations. Let me explain. So when we say that the eternal virtue does not deviate, we could mean the Tao within you, the constant virtue, is true and therefore does not deviate from the universal Tao. That is, the Tao within you is the exact same Tao as the external manifestation of the Tao in the universe. The internal reflects the external, no deviation. So that's what it means. Here's another interpretation, which is similar. I'm going to rely on you guys to pick and choose to see which is the more powerful interpretation for you personally. The second interpretation is, as the standard or example of the world, you demonstrate the truth that the Tao never deviates. That is, the principle of the Tao is the same today as it was in ancient times. It never changes. The sun rises and sets today just as it did thousands of years ago. Human nature today is prone to all kinds of pitfalls, just as human nature was thousands of years ago. Human beings have vast potential today to better themselves, just as human nature did thousands of years ago. The Tao has not changed. The Tao has not deviated. And as the standard of the world, you demonstrate that. Okay, let's move on. Line 10, return to the state of the boundless. Boundless is the translation that I use for 无极. 无极are the last 2 characters that you see here. Literally without boundary, meaning the ultimate. You're going to see this again quite a few more times as we continue. So 无极 is the pure primal state, like the infant and the Pooh concept. The infant, the state of the infant is from the first section, and the Pooh concept is from the 3rd section. So let's talk about returning to 无极. What that means, here we focus on the literal meaning, where 无极 is without boundaries, without limits. Therefore, returning to 无极 means spiritual liberation, being free from the boundaries or limits. You become an unlimited individual. This internal state of liberation is an internal, remember, that means black, affects everything you do externally. That's white. That's the more visible manifestation of what you do. And this is true in the failures of life, black, or ni, when things go against you, as well as success, the white, or sun, when things go smoothly for you. So that there is going to be, I would offer that as the most comprehensive and most accurate interpretation available anywhere for that particular line, line 10. Okay, let's go to the third section here. Third section to me is especially interesting because of the metaphor that it uses, which is the metaphor of the valley. First, let's start with line 11. Know the honor, hold to the humility. What does that mean? So here's my remark on that. With the work that we have done in the previous two sections, I believe that this section becomes easy to understand, or perhaps, easier. There are many people out there who feel that the Tao Te Ching is notoriously difficult to understand. I think just the opposite. I think that when it's explained properly, it's very easy. So let's talk about the difference between honor and humility. And what is this about? Knowing the honor, holding to the humility. Well, this is a logical progression of the first two sections, which is all about mastery of the Tao. When you master the Tao, even just a little bit of it, it naturally leads to great results. So mastery of the Tao overall leads to a great life. So it's going to happen at some point where your mastery of the Tao, regardless of how much or how little, leads to excellent results. And at some point, those excellent results will be recognized and honored. That's the honor part. So you want to make sure that having that type of accomplishment, that it doesn't go to your head. Now, this can be difficult to do in real life because oftentimes you see how success can change people and not necessarily for the better. Am I right? For the Tao cultivator, it is paramount. It's important to hold on to the Tao of humility. So Tao cultivators don't try to avoid recognition, but will hold on to being humble. That's what it means. Let's move on. So in lines 12 and 13, once again, we see the same four characters being repeated from one line to the next. They're translated in slightly different ways because contextually they mean slightly different things. Line 12, be the valley of the world. Line 13, being the valley of the world. So let's talk about being the valley. I think that in popular culture in the Western world, because of the contribution of various people from the past, I think a lot of people are already familiar with water as a metaphor for the Tao. I think a lot of people know, for instance, that there was a famous quote from Bruce Lee where he says, "Be water, my friend." So water is being used as, in a metaphoric sense, for the Tao, for flexibility, for philosophy, for virtues, etc. So water, I think, is something that even if you don't study the Tao, you may already know. But the valley, though, that's a different thing. If you talk to people who have not studied the Tao, or if you talk to most people who say they have read the Tao Te Ching, but not necessarily listening to a talk like this, they may not have a clue what the valley is. So being the valley is not as well known in the popular culture as other metaphors from the Tao Te Ching. But if you've been following this particular talk, you know that it comes up again and again in the study of the Tao. So it's very much part of the authentic tradition of the Tao. So what does it mean? Does anyone recall what being the valley implies? When we talked about being water as a well-known metaphor for the Tao, we've spoken of how water can be flexible, that you pour water into a container, it becomes that container. Pour into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. Pour into glass, it becomes the glass. What about the valley? Okay, so here's what being the valley means. To be the valley is to be open, receptive, and accepting. So imagine this spacious valley. It's symbolic of a state of mind where you are able to accommodate diverse opinions different from your own, where you are tolerant, that you have room for different opinions, that it's okay, that everyone can coexist in peace and harmony, that we don't necessarily need to be so much at odds or even at each other's throats. So that's partly what the valley means. So remember, open, receptive, accepting. I would use the word tolerance for that. Being very tolerant and accommodating is what that means. So here's the other meaning of the valley, and this comes from the fact that the ancient sages observed that the wide open valley, it's got enough space where it can hold many living things, myriad things, meaning myriad living creatures, flora and fauna, so plants and animals, all can thrive in the protective embrace of the valley. So another aspect of the valley is the nurturing side. The valley is nurturing of living things that are in it. When a Tao master is like a valley, the Tao master is nurturing of the people around him or her. So what I want to bring to your attention is that we have now talked about being tolerant and now being nurturing. To be nurturing is to be compassionate. So being tolerant and compassionate, these are the two characteristics of the valley that map perfectly to Buddhism. And this is where we talk about the intersection of the Tao and Buddhism. Specifically, I want to bring up for your attention tolerance and compassion of the Maitreya Buddha. So I bring up the Maitreya Buddha specifically because compassion is common to all bodhisattvas and all Buddhas. Tolerance is something that is more specific, more targeted, more of an identity of the Maitreya Buddha. But one version of Maitreya Buddha, the Chinese version of Maitreya Buddha. That may be a little puzzling, so let me explain. Here, I want to take everyone through Maitreya 101. What I mean is the basic concepts of the Maitreya Buddha. And then you can see how the tolerance and compassion of the Maitreya maps to the valley. The valley strictly from the Tao, Maitreya strictly from Buddhism, but they have a lot of similarities. So Maitreya, well, do you know who that is? It is sometimes called Laughing Buddha or Fat Buddha or Happy Buddha in the West. There's also conflation. A lot of times when people see the statue of the laughing Buddha, the fat Buddha, the happy Buddha, they will point to that and they will think that it's the Buddha. It's actually not. It's the Maitreya. The Maitreya Buddha. Not the same as the Buddha. The Buddha is the Sakyamuni Buddha. Let me hold off on that for just a moment, and I want to talk about the important thing, the happiness factor. Happy Buddha. Why happy? Well, that happiness is the natural result of tolerance and compassion. Tolerance and compassion also lead to prosperity as a natural side effect. So this is the reason why in the Western world, no matter where you go, if you were to visit a Chinese-owned business, so for instance, if you go to the Chinatown in your city, you will see many stores have a figure of the Maitreya Buddha, like a small shrine that's been set up. Why is that? Well, it's because of this bullet point that you're looking at right now. The happiness is a natural result of tolerance and compassion, but here's the important thing. It also, tolerance and compassion also lead to prosperity. So that is what a store owner or a Chinese businessman would like to see for his business. He wants prosperity, abundance, sharing, community, and therefore he puts up this figure of the Maitreya Buddha. Now, I said that this is the Chinese version of the Maitreya. This is a uniquely Chinese conception. This is where we talk a little bit about the history of the Maitreya and clear up some misconceptions. The concept of the Maitreya Buddha goes back to roughly the same time as the Sakyamuni Buddha that was the founder of Buddhism. So for centuries after that, Maitreya began to be spoken of at the same time as Sakyamuni Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, and Buddha that founded Buddhism lived 2,500 years ago. Maitreya Buddha was the Buddha that was foretold that would come in the future to spread the teaching of Buddhism. So not the same person. The Maitreya Buddha is actually not the Buddha, the Indian prince who founded Buddhism. So this is one of the most common mistakes in the West. And when the original Maitreya conception was crafted, it looked more like this. This is a giant statue of the Maitreya in India. It conforms to the original conception of the Maitreya. This is like 100 feet up in the air. It's a 100-foot tall statue. It's in India facing Pakistan. So looking at this Maitreya, you probably would not recognize it as the happy Buddha or the fat Buddha or the laughing Buddha, because this Maitreya is not laughing, not fat, has a rather stern expression, doesn't seem all that happy. So you would not recognize that in the same way that you would recognize the image of the Maitreya Buddha in perhaps a Chinese restaurant. And that's because there was a transformation or evolution that occurred roughly 1,000 years ago. So remember, Maitreya Buddha, the original conception alongside Sakyamuni Buddha was like 2,500 years ago, so more than 2,000 years ago. But about 1,000 years ago, roughly, actually more like 1,100 years ago, there was a monk in ancient China who the Chinese believed turned out to be the reincarnation of the Maitreya Buddha. So this particular monk was Well, much wider than the original Indian conception of the Maitreya. This particular image appealed to the ancient Chinese greatly. The ancient Chinese people, you got to understand, despite times of hardship and chaos and warfare, regardless of all those challenges, they had always retained a very optimistic, cheerful, positive, hopeful, happy core. Now, if you happen to know actual Chinese people in real life, if you know a lot of them, you will probably, it won't take you long to detect that they're naturally cheerful and optimistic. So this was appealing because the happiness factor is very much something that resonated with the ancient Chinese. So from about 1100 years ago, the image of the Maitreya Buddha for the Chinese displaced the original image from India and spread far and wide to Korea, to Japan, and now all over the world because of Chinese-owned businesses. So remember, the basic idea of this Buddha is the happiness that comes from tolerance and compassion. And I want to illustrate that conception with another story. So when Tao sages want to make the point about being more forgiving, they will sometimes tell a particular story about another historical figure. This historical figure had a name, Liu Kuan, and it's helpful if you know a little bit more about the context of ancient history. So let me tell you this particular story about Liu Kuan. Once upon a time, in ancient China, during the time of the Han Dynasty, Han Cao, there was a man by the name of Liu Kuan. His father named him Kuan, meaning wide open, lenient, accommodating, and perhaps there's a certain power to a name. Because indeed, Liu Kuan grew up exactly as his father had hoped. He was generous with other people, he was easygoing, he was always calm, he never got mad. He was also highly intelligent, so he excelled in his studies of the ancient classics. Later on, he also did very well in the ancient Chinese civil service exam. This is part of a system of meritocracy in ancient China. You had to do well in such exams to become a government official. So Liu Kuan became an official. So this is where you should know a little bit about the different classes of people in ancient China. There was a huge gap between the status of the different classes. At the very high end, you have the rulers and the nobles. And at the very low end, you have the peasants. The peasants had no power to speak of. Unlike us, they did not have the voting franchise. They have no status. Their lives were disposable, expendable. The higher levels, like the ruler, the nobles, etc., if they were to kill someone at the lower level, like peasants and so forth, they could easily escape with no consequences. So there's no concept like all lives have value, and you can't just go around killing people. In ancient times, that was not the case. So between the very high and the very low, you've got the government officials. They can range along the spectrum. If they are a minor official at a lower level, they also have lower level of prestige and power. If you are a high level official in the court of the emperor or the king, you had a very high level of prestige and power. So regardless, the difference between official and the people were stark. So in comparison to the way things are today, back then, the common people regarded any officials with extreme reverence. This was because an official could serve multiple duties, could be judge, jury, and executioner. So you wanted to make sure you did not piss them off, did not make them angry. That was one factor. Another factor was that we know that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great power corrupts greatly. So many people who made it as an official would get full of themselves. That power would corrupt them, and then they would be rather abusive of the common people, like the peasants. But Liu Kuan was the exception to that. He was exactly the same as he was before he became an official. He was still lenient, accommodating, never got mad, generous with people, easygoing, always remained calm. So one day, Liu Kuan is riding in his carriage, drawn by his ox. He's making his way home when he was stopped by a peasant. He was suddenly stopped by a peasant. The peasant accosted him, saying, "This ox is mine. What are you doing with my ox? Why did you steal it? Give it back to me." Now, Liu Kuan was completely taken by surprise. He knew that the ox belonged to him, but this was so out of the blue that he didn't even know what to say for a moment. So the peasant unhitched the ox from the carriage and led the ox away, to reclaim the ox that the peasant thought was his. And Liu Kuan sat there in amazement. Wow, did that just happen? And then he thought, oh well, he's gonna realize his mistake sooner or later. I guess I'm just gonna have to walk home. And so he did. He walked the rest of the way home. When the peasant got to his home with the ox, he was quite surprised himself to find that his ox, his actual ox, had returned to his farm. So he's looking at the ox that really belonged to him and the ox that he thought was his, that he thought someone else had stolen, and he realized that he made a dreadful mistake. So to put this in context, because Liu Kuan used the ox for transportation, drawing the carriage, so in modern times, this will be the equivalent of someone coming to you and saying, "That's my car, what are you doing with my car?" and then gets in your car and drives away. So that's a rough equivalent. So the peasant felt horrible. He made a mistake. And when he told other people said, "Well, wait a minute, you took that ox away from Liu Kuan, who's a government official." Well, that's an even bigger deal because of the disparity, the gap, the chasm of power level between the official and the common people. So now he was really sweating bullets. So quickly he needed to return. He knew he needed to return the ox as soon as possible. So he led the ox to where Liu Kuan lived, back to Liu Kuan's home. So he made it to Liu Kuan's home, and the peasant knelt down to beg for forgiveness. He said, 大人. 大人 means great person, great individual. It's the honorary that the common people had for all government officials. He said, 大人, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake. He was kneeling, he was repenting. So another official will probably be like, okay, well, time for punishment, because remember, the lives of peasants were basically disposable and worthless, very expendable. But again, not Liu Kuan. What Liu Kuan said instead was, oh, please, no need to kneel. Of course, oxen all look the same to us. I cannot tell the difference between one ox to another. So when you mistakenly thought this ox was yours, that was not unusual. So thank you. Thank you for bringing my ox back to my home. So he let the peasant go, much to the surprise of all other peasants. And when this peasant went back home, he talked to other people and said, what an incredible person Liu Kuan was. So kind, just amazing, never seen before. He couldn't stop talking about it to everyone. And the people around Liu Kuan received a positive influence as well. That is, they followed his example, and they themselves wanted to be more tolerant and more compassionate to others. The end. So, by this particular story, I hope you're not getting the message that when someone does a carjacking, that you should accept that, or when someone does something wrong against you, that you should be like Liu Kuan, not reacting, letting it happen, and so forth. That's actually not the message of the story. The message of the story is about the second part. It's in the second part. You see, what we know is that as we go about life, it's inevitable. It's gonna happen that sooner or later, somebody somewhere is gonna make a mistake or do something wrong against you. That being the case, the question is, what will you do when that happens? So this story is told to highlight what it means to be a valley, to be open and accepting, to incorporate some of that mercy in your own interactions with other people, so that you will consider that as an option, rather than, I'm gonna press charges, or I'm gonna get back to you, I'm gonna get even with you, I'm gonna exact revenge. Rather than that, consider the possibility of being the valley, or being like Liu Kuan, to maybe, wasn't such a big deal, I should just let it go. So that concept of the valley, you can see, is corresponding with the concept of the tolerance and compassionate Maitreya Buddha. So interesting correspondence and intersection with Buddhism. Let's move on. So let's talk about what happens when you are like the valley, when you are able to embody the valley, be the valley. Then the line 14 here says, the eternal virtue shall be sufficient. When you are able to embody all of the characteristics of the valley, the openness, the nurturing nature, you find that you don't need anything more than the eternal virtue. You find that what you already possess is enough. So just like the valley, corresponding to the Maitreya Buddha, this particular line, that you don't need anything more than eternal virtue, this is also perfectly mapping to an important teaching from Zen Buddhism. And this teaching is taught by the sixth patriarch of Zen Buddhism, Huineng. He pointed out that your original nature, now remember, original nature is pointing to the same essence as the infant or Mooji or Pu. your original nature is completely sufficient by itself. And here we're saying the same thing. Eternal virtue shall be sufficient. This is important. Why? Because of the next line. The next line, line 15, says, return to the state of plain wood. Okay? Pu is the plain wood. Here's the connection. When you realize that you don't need anything else, that you have sufficiency, what that's going to do for you is that it gives you, number one, the happiness of contentment. The happiness of contentment maps right back to the happiness of the Maitreya Buddha. Number two, it frees your mind from the fear that you don't have enough, the fear of lack, the fear of inadequacy. If you think about it, this fear that I don't have enough, that I don't have things that are good enough, fear of inadequacy is what drives most people to chase after things, to be grasping at things, to succumb to material desires, to suffer dukkha. So dukkha is yet another term from Buddhism. It means a lack of satisfaction. It means imperfection. So when people find themselves constantly seeking after material things, more money, more wealth, more toys, they are never satisfied. They are always just a little bit more miserable than they ought to be. They are in dukkha. They are, and the more severe translation of dukkha is suffering. So they are suffering in a sense. They are in misery. So sufficiency frees you from dukkha. Sufficiency frees you from always feeling like you don't have enough, that you're lacking something. This, in turn, will empower you to let go of the clutter that you have accumulated. So think about all the clutter that you have added to your collection, even just in the recent past. There's probably a lot. I know that's true in my case. If you are able to let that go, if you are able to simplify, you go back to the original state of simplicity. So remember, when you were born, when you were a newborn baby, an infant, you came into this world with nothing. So everything that you possess is actually on top of that, is actually extra. And you can certainly do with a lot less than everything that you possess right now. Okay, so that is returning to the state of plain wood. So stick with me for just a moment longer, guys. We're in the final section, and I hope that we can hit the very end of this chapter today, and then we can leave the paraphrase for next time. So take a look at 16. Plain wood splits, then becomes tools. So we know the concept of plain wood. A plain piece of wood is at the point of maximum potential. Then you work on that plain piece of wood. You shape it into something. Then it becomes a tool, or perhaps maybe a statue. To become many things. That's much more specific. Plain piece of wood is just raw material, right? So it is not anything specific. By shaping it, the unspecific becomes more specific. So this is what I mean here. As mentioned previously, a piece of plain wood is cut, shaped, worked on until you get something out of it. So this is the concept, and Tao sages understand the overall process. So when you study the Tao, when you master the Tao, you gain this insights, you gain overview of how this works, from plain wood to something specific. and now you can use it for practical applications in life. So here's the bottom line. The typical person understands how to use tools, and the tools may be something that was shaped out of plain wood into a tool that you can use, that you can hold in your hands. The sage understands how to use the process of how plain wood becomes tools and apply that to people. That means this: as we all come together and work together in life, we all, each one of us, brings something unique to the table. There are some things you can do that I cannot do, and vice versa. And when we come together as a group, there's something that each one of us can contribute that is unique. That's important, because the sage, when he brings people together in that way, he's bringing all these unique talents together and combining them for a worthwhile goal. They are able to do this because they are well versed in the pattern of life. So line 17, the sage utilizes them. So I want to be very careful here and point out, this doesn't mean sages see people as tools. They don't see people as something to be used. Rather, they see people as having unique potentials that can manifest in complementary ways. And each person is special in that sense. So the task for the sage is not to use people, but to bring out that potential, to manifest it in a way that benefits the greater whole. And this is because a group of people working together harmoniously can accomplish anything. So this brings us to the concept of leadership in the Tao. Here you see line 18 following line 17. The sages utilize them and then become leaders. So let's talk about leadership in the Tao. So the real task of leadership is not, as what most people think, ordering other people around. The real task, the real responsibility of leadership is to bring out the best from everyone. So that's what leadership with the Tao sages will look like. When you have something good going on, when something has the Tao process guiding it along, perhaps because of involvement from a Tao sage, people may or may not be aware of what's going on, but they definitely know when they're contributing in a positive way, and that contribution will give them a great deal of satisfaction. If you have been in a good team, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a joy to be part of a good team, to contribute meaningfully to what the team is trying to accomplish, to pull in the same direction, to do something that you're good at, that no one else is taking care of, but you're taking care of it for the team. What a good feeling. What a great feeling. So that's in the context of a team, which may be something like a workplace, but I want to focus attention on a different kind of team, the family. So wise parents will also use the same idea here, the Tao-centric, Tao-oriented leadership to keep their families close. Members of the family all can contribute uniquely to the harmony and happiness of the family. So I'd like everyone to keep that in mind. This is one of the important points. Okay, now we're on the last line. That's great. Last line says, thus the greater whole is undivided. So let me talk about being divided as opposed to being united. We all know from experience that when you and I are divided, we become far less effective as a group. Whereas when we come together, we become much more powerful as a group. And that's because there's power in unity. And so now, I think if you remember our discussion from 27, you can now see a clear connection between this chapter and the previous chapter, because the previous chapter talked about close-knit groups, groups that nobody wants to leave, groups that keep people connected together. A family that's close keeps people together. So here's the bottom line for this entire chapter. Lao Tzu, once again, is addressing our connection to one another at the most basic level of reality. So what I mean by that is friends, family, people we know, people in this group, no matter who it is, we are all connected to one another at the most fundamental level of existence. When we're gathering together now in these weekly meetings, we're actually celebrating that connection. That connection is the most treasured, most cherished thing that I can imagine in the Tao. So I want to leave you with that thought. There's a lot more to go through to summarize this chapter that is so incredibly profound, but we are running out of time, so we have to get to the summary to leave everyone with some food for thought in the weeks to come. So here's what I want to present to everyone. It's similar to what we had seen before, the basic pattern of Tao cultivation, and I say table, and that's because I have put it together in a tabular format. So let me share that with everyone. So my intention is to keep it simple, keep it easy to reference. With this right here, you have the first part of this chapter all formatted in a way that I hope is easy to follow. So take a look. Know the masculine, hold on to the feminine, be the watercourse of the world. As the watercourse of the world, the constant virtue, eternal virtue if you prefer, will not depart. And you return to the state of the infant, your most powerful, ultimate, original state. Second row, know the white, hold on to the black. Be the standard of the world. As the standard of the world, the constant virtue, there shall be no deviation. You return to the state of Mooji, without limits, spiritual liberation, transcending limits. The third row, know the honor, hold on to the humility. Be the valley of the world. As the valley of the world, your constant virtue shall be sufficient. You return to the state of Pu, or plain wood. So in this simple table, the first part of this chapter is hereby summarized. And now, let me make sure everyone understands the specific terms. I am not assuming that everyone has been following me for years now and know what these terms are all about. So the first term to cover, Wuji, here you see the Chinese characters. It is the ultimate state without limits, the infinite void of the Tao. And another term is Pu. That is the plain wood. And here, I want to inject a little note. Be sure you understand why uncarved block is not the best translation. Plain wood is the most accurate translation. Uncarved block is a term that originated from the 60s when people first explored Tao concepts. It's less than perfect for Pooh because a block has already been shaped into a block. Whereas a plain piece of wood is something that you can find just walking around in the forest. It might not have ever been touched by human hands. That's the difference. Okay.
Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.